Hello, I'm Evan Mitchell, music director of the Kingston Symphony Orchestra, and for the week of April the 6th, here's What's On. So we're coming up to the end of our season, and as such, we are saying adieu to the 2014-2015 Masterworks season with a wonderful Masterworks finale. We've saved something really special for you. This is a concert which is going to be transcendental and powerful and beautiful. It's everything that a Masterworks finale should be. We have three wonderful pieces, an exceptional guest soloist, the return of our conductor emeritus, Glenn Fast. This is going to be a really special concert, and it's one, again, that I'm looking forward to very much being an audience member rather than being its conductor, and being able to enjoy this wonderful music played by your Kingston Symphony Orchestra out in the hall rather than from the podium. This concert takes place one day only on Sunday, April the 12th at 2:30 p.m. at the Isabel Bader Center for the Performing Arts. And if you haven't picked up your tickets yet, I strongly urge you this week to keep checking the Kingston Symphony website, because right now this show is completely sold out, so the only way you're going to be able to get a ticket for this wonderful Masterworks series finale is to just keep checking and see if there have been any returns over the course of the week. Fingers crossed, hopefully you can get in to see this blockbuster of a concert. Now, this is a real powerhouse of a programmatic lineup. We're starting with Beethoven's incredible Overture to Coriolan. We're moving on to Shostakovich's first cello concerto played by the incomparable Denis Jokic. And we're finishing off with Schubert's Ninth Symphony, the Great C Major. So this is a very powerful concert filled with music by three great composers, three undisputed masters, who in their own way were using their compositional art as a means to express themselves as the result of some kind of turmoil that was going on in their lives. And that's what makes this concert so interesting, is that you hear these great works by these monumental composers who are all experiencing personal hardship in one way or another, and how they react to that and how that affects their art. Three different perspectives, three glorious pieces, one fabulous Masterworks series finale. So let's start with the Beethoven Overture, and this is of course inspired by the Shakespearean take on the Roman general Coriolanus, and as such it is a remarkably dramatic overture. It's not nearly as lighthearted as Beethoven would often touch his overtures, for example, the Fidelio Overture. Instead, we've got all these dark ruminations, very powerful, very dramatic, and surprising musical entries. In fact, it's been likened almost to the score of a horror film. But of course, these are all the characteristics that make it so popular, and so as such, it's one of the most amazing of the Beethoven overtures, and we're happy to start off this concert with this glorious musical depiction of the fate of General Coriolanus. Here's a little taste. Moving on to Shostakovich's first cello concerto, I personally find Shostakovich to be one of the most fascinating composers of the 20th century, and he was as much a product of his time and political circumstance as any composer in history. Shostakovich lived out most of his life under perpetual fear from the government censors and the government artistic bodies, because he had been labeled a composer who was not necessarily composing within the spectrum of the motherland. And so, particularly under Stalin's regime, Shostakovich lived under perpetual fear for his life and the life and well-being of his family. He had been branded a potential enemy of the state for the nature of the compositions he had been writing, and so it was just not a great time to be an avant-garde composer in Russia. And as such, he had actually placed his bed by the door so that if the state police had come to pick him up to take him off to the gulag in the middle of the night, it wouldn't have woken his family. That's the sort of desolation and desperate circumstances under which Shostakovich was living day by day. In fact, Mstislav Rostropovich, the world-famous cellist, was a great friend and close confidant of Shostakovich, and I heard an unbelievable story, straight from Rostropovich himself, in which he received a phone call from Shostakovich in the middle of the day saying, "Can you come over to my apartment? Don't say anything over the phone, just come on over." And so Rostropovich made his way over to Shostakovich's apartment. He was answered at the door. Shostakovich looked ashen. He said, "Don't say anything inside my apartment, it's been bugged." And so he brought him onto the couch, gripped Rostropovich's hands at the wrist, and just silently wept. And that was the only way that he could express himself under such unbelievable oppression from this fascist government that was censoring him and in fact threatening his very life. And so, of course, this had a great effect on Shostakovich's compositional output. Quite often, you'll get a sense of some darkness or some pessimism, but more often, you'll see him standing up and either directly or indirectly thumbing his nose at the establishment that was threatening his life and, of course, censoring him and oppressing him as an artist and as a person. And the Cello Concerto is a perfect example of that. It really hits everything on the musical spectrum, on the emotional spectrum. It showcases Shostakovich's great strengths as a composer, and it is an unbelievable tour de force for the solo cellist. In fact, there is an entire movement dedicated to a cadenza for the solo cellist. It is a fiendishly difficult technical and musical passage that is played by the solo cello alone. So here's a little tidbit from the very opening of this cello concerto where you can get a sense of Shostakovich's great wit and his sardonic sense as he dares to stand up and thumb his nose at the Stalin regime. And we're ending with Schubert's great C major, his masterpiece in my humble opinion. What an incredible symphony. It actually is not his Ninth Symphony as it is catalogued. That was a clever ploy on behalf of the publishers, because after the great success of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Ninth Symphonies in general became something that was quite fashionable to compose. And so even though this was Schubert's Seventh Symphony, in fact composed before his unfinished symphony, which was his Eighth, we categorized the Great C Major Symphony as Schubert's Ninth as the result of this ploy from the publishers, although there is an interesting parallel between the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven and the quote-unquote Ninth Symphony of Schubert. Schubert, of course, was fascinated with Beethoven, and he adored his Ninth Symphony, and there are many quotes and tidbits that allude to the Ninth Symphony musically throughout the Great C Major. But what's most important to know about this unbelievable symphony is that it again shows Schubert, a symphonic master, at the very peak of his powers. Schubert, of course, died far too young. He only lived to be 31 years old, but he wrote nearly 1,000 works, and he is one of the undisputed masters of the symphonic form. This shows him at that very peak of his symphonic output. And it's an incredible piece. It's something that is a remarkable way for the orchestra to say goodbye to an extraordinary masterwork season. In fact, there are particularly wonderful passages for the French horn and the oboe that you should be listening for. But this is one of the great works in the repertoire, and it is fully deserving of the name the Great C Major. Here's a little snippet to whet your appetite. So for this week, that's What's On. If you'd like to learn more about this program or any of the other concerts the Kingston Symphony performs, then browse to kingstonsymphony.on.ca. Purchasing tickets couldn't be easier. You can give us a call at 613-546-9729 and speak with one of our wonderful patron service representatives, or you can buy tickets online at kingstonsymphony.on.ca. Thanks for listening to What's On, and I'll see you at the concert.